Hi, Randy.
Hello, Melanie. How are you today?
I'm fine. I'm enjoying the sunshine again in Lampeter.
You're obviously angelic today, Melanie. Your face is glowing.
I know. I haven't got any curtains yet for my study, so the sun comes in. But it's nice to have it anyway, isn't it?
For a change. For a
Yeah.
change. So
And
you
it's a bit,
preaching on Sunday?
I certainly am, yes.
Excellent, excellent. And what's going to be the main point?
Well, before we get to the main point, can I have a complaint?
You complain all you like, Melanie,
Because I think we need to complain again about the
about the
lectionary, don't you?
lectionary. Yeah, it's missed out the most important bit, hasn't it?
Yes.
It puts today's reading in context.
Yeah, well, because it's missed out Jesus's third prediction of his death, isn't
Yeah,
it, and his resurrection.
yeah,
And we saw before, didn't we, that these three predictions that Jesus makes of his death and resurrection, um, they each teach us something by the response after them.
yeah.
And what we've got
And
today is the response, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. And I've just totally lost my train of thought, but never mind. Yeah, because this is the one that explains what the cross is all about, right at the very end. So yes, it doesn't make sense at all.
No, why would
So,
they do that?
well, they want to shorten the reading, don't they? We don't want church too long. Got to get home for the roast potatoes.
Yeah, well, then you miss the most important thing, don't you?
So anyway, Melanie, what's going to be your main points then?
Well, I think the main point is, as you've said, at the end, isn't it? Because it comes
Hmm.
on to what Jesus came to do. But before we get to that, you've got this interesting encounter that James and John have with Jesus, don't you?
I have a question. Serious question. I know you will know the answer to this question. Where is Peter? Because usually it's Peter, James, and John. It's always the three of them. But here it's just James and John. And I was just wondering what had happened to Peter.
How would I know where Peter's gone?
I don't know, but but I was certain you'd know the answer. I wondered whether he'd just gone for a cup of tea and was taking the notes.
Or maybe somebody else is getting a turn to be the butt of the teaching today. It's
Maybe.
usually Peter who launches in with something, isn't it? But here it's James and John. And
But
actually, as we see later, all of them are implicated in the same thing, aren't they?
but actually there's a semi-seriousness to it because Peter, James, and John are always the ones who act as a threesome. So why is it just James and John this time? Although, as you say later on, we hear about the rest of the disciples getting cheesed off with James and John. So I was just wondering. But then it also struck me that did Mark get his information from Peter? And so, in a way, maybe this is Peter trying to, in some way, disassociate himself with another stupid incident. I don't
Well,
know.
it doesn't stop him on the others, does it?
Well, no, no.
And he is there because it says in verse 41 when the
All the
10
other
heard that, well,
disciples.
he's not there, but he's implicated in that same error that they make. He's
Yeah,
not there in that conversation because James and John take him aside. And of course, when we read the account, I can't remember which gospel it's in where we get this, where it's their mother that goes to speak to Jesus, isn't it? James
yeah,
and John's mother.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it is these two brothers who want Jesus to do something for them. So Jesus
And
has
look,
just said that he's going to die, he's going to suffer, he's going to be mocked and spat upon and flogged and killed. And they say, "Oh, Jesus, we want you to do something for us."
can I say something?
Well, yeah, go on then. I was saying something important though.
Well, you were, but I think you can take your important point even further. That on the one hand, you get Jesus, and he's going to be the ultimate slave, the ultimate servant, ultimate humbleness, self-sacrifice, compared to human self-centeredness. And so you get that contrast incredibly marked between what our response is, our self-centeredness, and Jesus's self-sacrifice, being a servant for all, who we're supposed to be imitating. So you get that immediate contrast, and that contrast is lost because the lectionary writers have decided, as you say, not to include the death and resurrection, the prediction of the death and resurrection.
And but the thing is, though, what's important is actually we're all a little bit like James and John. We might not think
Yeah,
we are, and we might not be as blatant, but don't we all want Jesus to do something for us?
yeah, and that's the whole point of the whole passage, isn't it? Or point number two. That yeah, that's it. We want Jesus to do something for us. Why are we a Christian? Why do we try and follow Jesus? What's our agenda? Because we want Jesus to do something for us. That we're not imitating his attitude on the cross. We're closer, as you say, to James and to John.
Yeah, and JC Ryle has got something to say about it.
I'm sure he has. Go on then.
Do you know what? Nobody has sent me any other JC Ryle memorabilia. I'm very disappointed.
Maybe
Because of
nobody
course I'm only in
watches.
it. I'm only in it to get me JC Ryle memorabilia.
Well, 10 of those still haven't sent me any free books to review and promote for them.
And maybe it's because we should be putting ourselves last rather than first. Just a
Maybe.
thought.
Maybe we're
Anyway,
after something
where? Well,
like James and John.
here's what JC Ryle says. Anyway, he says there are few true Christians who do not resemble James and John when they first begin the service of Christ. We are apt to expect far more present enjoyment from our religion than the gospel warrants us to expect. We are apt to forget the cross and the tribulation and think only of the crown. We form an incorrect estimate of our own patience and power and endurance. We misjudge our own ability to stand temptation and trial. And the result of it all is that we often buy wisdom dearly by bitter experience after many disappointments and not a few falls.
Very good. Very true.
Because it brings us on to the next bit, doesn't it? Because so they ask Jesus, well, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And Jesus says, what is it you want me to do for you? And we need to hold
Yeah.
that question in mind, don't we, for next week?
Yes, we do. Because it's exactly, even in the Greek, it is exactly the same question. Yes.
Yeah. So
Well
because we
spotted, Melanie.
yeah, ka-ching. It's really important, isn't it? Because we contrast the James and John and the other disciples' response
With
with blind
Bartimaeus.
Bartimaeus. Yeah.
Yes. And isn't it interesting? Do you want me to give you a hint for your sermon in a week or so's time? You're contrasting fame versus fortune. No, fame versus faith. There you go. There's your 3 points. I've given you
Well,
your sermon.
it's a little spoiler, isn't it, for next time? But
Oh, how
anyway,
generous. I'm doing your sermon writing for you.
I'm doing yours for you. What are you on about? Anyway, so Jesus says, what is it you want me to do for you? And they say, well, grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. Well,
Yeah.
they've got part of the way, haven't they, actually?
Sorry?
They've got part of the way.
Yes, because they recognize your glory, that a glorious kingdom that belongs to Jesus. They recognize that, yeah, Jesus is the Messiah. Yeah.
They've got part of the way there. But then Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking.
But, Melanie, sometimes you need to place it within context for James and John. They're on the way to the Jerusalem. They're on their way to what they believe is grandeur. You read the Psalms of Ascent, and you could quite easily pick that view up that Jesus is going to be this great political king. And they're actually in the situation, same position physically as those Psalms of Ascent. So to be fair to them, you can understand where they're coming from. But carry on.
You can, apart from the fact Jesus has told them 3 times now that he's going to suffer and die. And that was not what the Messiah was going to do, was it? Suffer and die, at least not in the common expectation of it. So
But humanly speaking, you can quite understand where they're coming from,
you can,
which
but not
makes
if
our
they
applic which
not if
makes
they'd
our
been
applic
listening.
which makes our application easier when we're preaching this, because James and John's experience is the same that many of us and many of the people we'll be sharing with on Sunday are going through, and their reaction is in many ways quite natural, especially the physical context that they find themselves in at this point. That doesn't make them right, and they are totally wrong, and they've missed everything that Jesus has done in the first 9 chapters of Mark's Gospel. But one can understand it and be empathetic with where they're coming from.
Well, I think it's true that we all do have our own expectations of Jesus, and they don't
Hmm.
necessarily bear relation to what he's actually said. And that's a danger for us all as Christians, isn't it? That we expect Jesus to do a certain thing or act in a certain way. What would Jesus do? And often our answer is closer to what we
We would do.
think he should do, or
Yeah.
a better version of ourselves than actually what Jesus has said. So Jesus has to bring him back to the reality of what he's going to do, because he
Yeah.
says, "Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And he says it in
Hmm.
such a way that the answer should have been no.
Hmm. Hmm. And especially since the cup was a symbol in those times of judgment and wrath of
Mm,
God, and Jesus is going to take it upon himself, um, and identifying with us in our sin and in our suffering. Um,
yeah. So they should have said no, but they're so brazen, aren't they, in a way? And I suppose we are just as full of assumptions and about our own um, grandeur as they were, because they say we are able.
yeah,
So they think they can do that, but they can't. They couldn't possibly.
but also they do. Both James and John, according to tradition, don't they? James ends up martyred. John ends up on exile in Patmos. So they are going to have to face suffering at some point.
They will, but it's not of the same significance as Jesus is. So
Hmm.
they don't drink the cup of the wrath of God in the same way, did they, that Jesus
Hmm.
does, because he does it on behalf of the rest of us. Uh,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, Jesus says, yeah, you will be baptized and drink the cup in the same way, doesn't he?
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
do. And in fact, virtually all of the disciples do, don't they?
they do. They do.
Well, all of them really. If you count John's exile to Patmos as being included in it.
Yeah. Be rather nice, wouldn't it? Spending the rest of your life on a Greek island,
Yeah, but
sunning yourself.
I don't think there was tavernas and bazooka music and glasses of ouzo though. I don't think it was as good as that.
You don't reckon?
No, I reckon it was a bit bleak. That's why
Right.
it was in exile. But you know, Jesus has to correct them and say, even though you will be martyred, even though there's that huge sacrifice that they will make, it still doesn't determine their places, their particular locations in heaven.
Hmm.
They'll be there, they'll get their crown because of their faith in him, but it's not like they have a great martyrdom, so they're going to have like the top spot. It's not like a
Yes.
payoff like that, is it? Our faith isn't a payoff like that. The amount of effort you put in, the amount of sacrifice you give to get rewards at the end
Hmm.
of the day, that's not what it's about.
No, it isn't. No, no.
And then, of course, the story turns to the other 10 of the disciples, isn't it?
Hmm.
Because this has been going on privately, hasn't it? This been took Jesus aside. And now the rest of the disciples are really cross.
Yeah, they want to be at the right hand as well.
I'm going to say, what do you think they're cross about in particular?
Well, that's what they want as well. They all want this, and they've probably been walking along the road having a good mutter to, to each other.
Yeah. Who do that James and John think they are?
Mhm. Their
I
dad
follow
was
Jesus
Zebedee.
more closely.
Yeah, yeah. And Jesus then calls them together, doesn't he? And tells them, well, no, this is not what following me is about. Following me is about a life of service and being a slave
Because
of
we're
all.
Yeah, because we're back, aren't we, to the sort of the chapter 8, verse 34 about about denying ourselves, taking up our cross and following Jesus. That's the mark of a disciple. And we saw that the rich young man in last week's bit of Mark 10, he couldn't do it. He couldn't deny
Mm,
himself because he couldn't give up his riches. He couldn't put
yeah,
Jesus first. And here we've got even the disciples can't manage it by themselves. And Jesus said
yeah,
it's impossible, doesn't it? But all things are possible with him.
yeah.
But he's got to do that teaching. They can't live like that. We're meant to be different. Jesus's followers are meant to be different. It's a challenge though,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. And then it all ends with that great, maybe even the key text in Mark's Gospel of verse 45, which I understand is the first time that Jesus actually explains the purpose of his death, the use of the ransom for many and give. It's something he does voluntary, the sin offering, the
Mm.
purpose of his death.
And it's so important, isn't it? So important. I can remember a colleague of a good an older, wiser colleague of mine being confronted by somebody at a church meeting. Actually, I think the encounter happened in the toilet, if I remember rightly. But anyway, and they said, well, they were challenging the idea of Jesus giving his life as a substitute. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they said, well, where does our Lord say anything about being a substitute? It's all Paul, right? And of course, we don't believe.
Hmm.
And my older, wiser colleague said, well, how do you understand Mark 10:45? The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Yeah.
That is
Jesus
Jesus giving his life for our freedom, isn't it?
and Jesus is explicit there about it from this point
Absolutely
onwards.
explicit. But of course, it
Yeah.
has cropped up before in a less explicit way when he was identifying himself with the Passover lamb,
Yeah.
the Passover lamb, which died in place of the firstborn in Israel, and now Jesus is going to die in our place. So it has already come up, but not in this explicit way.
Yeah. And which then leaves you with the challenge of the sermon. How are you going to respond?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we'll see there, won't we? We'll see it exemplified in Bartimaeus
Yeah. Yeah.
when we get on to the next thing. But so why do you think it's so important, Andy, that we believe that Jesus stood as our substitute? Because there's so many of the liberals in the church just completely discount it and say it's cruel and it's old fashioned and it's nonsensical. But why is it so important?
Because we've seen, haven't we, if we follow as we followed the disciples through the earlier chapters of Mark's Gospel, that we're just not able to do it for ourselves. I've recently been doing a series of Bible studies on Zephaniah with a house group up here. And that's the conclusion our house group came to, that God's judgment is so vast, it's so all encompassing that there's no way we can earn God's favor and God's grace on our own merits. And the Bible study group themselves came to that conclusion while studying Zephaniah. And so here we see Jesus say, well, look, you don't have to because I'm the gift. I'm giving my life as a ransom for you. Does that answer your question, Melanie?
Oh, I think it answers it perfectly. It's the key, isn't it? It's the
Does
key
that
in
mean does that mean this is now the second week I've got something right?
the Yeah, but if you'd have asked me, I'd have given a very similar answer. So because it is central to what we believe, isn't it?
Of course it
Absolutely.
is.
And actually the whole thing falls apart otherwise, because if Jesus' death wasn't necessary in that way, why would he go to the cross? And how are we saved? Because without the cross, without Jesus having to die in our place because we can't ever be good enough, well then we're left trying to be good enough. And where's the benchmark?
Did you know? Did you know that Zephaniah? I didn't know this until I was doing it with this house group, and it suddenly hit me that Zephaniah hints at a Messiah in the form of Jesus. I never knew that. But it was as
What?
we were studying together that this passage, especially today's gospel reading from Mark 10, actually comes alive within the context of Zephaniah. It's fascinating, isn't it? How the Old Testament predicts so much in the New Testament. And to
Oh,
actually
absolutely.
understand the depth of the New Testament, we need to know our Old Testaments.
We do. It's so vital that that old heresy that, of the Old Testament was, before Jesus, and once Jesus came, we can discard the Old Testament. Christians who say, "Oh, I never read the Old Testament. I just want to read about the Lord Jesus." And it's like, the Lord Jesus is all the way through the Old Testament.
Yeah, Jesus is there in Zephaniah. It's amazing. And we discussed it in the house group. And
Yeah, yeah. Well, when we, other unlikely books of the Bible where you meet Jesus, I mean, is in all of them. But when we preached through the book of Judges, we kept
yeah,
seeing Jesus in unexpected places.
yeah.
So
I mean, you find him in Ezra and Nehemiah as well, because I mean, Ezra and Nehemiah, they do a great job, but they fail. And Jesus does exactly the same stuff as Ezra and Nehemiah, but he succeeds, if that's quite the right phrase.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's all the way. Jesus is all the way through the Old Testament,
yeah,
and you're right. You can't get the full depth of what Jesus came to do without understanding the Old Testament too.
yeah, yes.
Isn't God
Well,
good?
he is, isn't he? Have you had a good week this week?
Oh, I've had an
Well,
amazing week. I've had a really good week. God's been
great,
good. He's good all of the time, of course, but it's been a particularly good week today.
good,
Sharing the good news of Jesus with people, home groups, Christianity Explored. Been in the school
brilliant,
today for the first time, the primary school here in Lampeter.
great,
Wonderful. Yeah.
brilliant. Well, I hope you have a good sermon and you have a good week next week.
Thank you. And you too, Andy. Hope you enjoy your home group doing Zephaniah. It sounds great fun too.
Take care. Ta-da.
Bye.